The storm had already swallowed the whole town by the time someone knocked on my door, and I remember thinking, nobody sane is out there tonight, so whoever that is, it's not going to be good. I pulled back the curtain just enough to see through the blowing snow, and that's when I caught the flashing amber lights cutting through the whiteout, a tow truck, inching its way up my driveway like it regretted every life decision that led it here. And standing behind it, arms crossed like she owned the storm itself, was Marlene Briggs, president of our HOA, a woman who treated bylaws like scripture and neighbors like case files. Right then, before I even opened the door, I knew exactly what this was about, and I knew it was about to get stupid. See, my name's Daniel Carter. I'd been living in Cedar Ridge Estates for about 6 years at that point. Quiet neighborhood, decent people, the kind of place where folks wave when you pass by even if you don't know each other's names. At least that's how it used to be before Marlene took over the board and turned everything into a checklist of violations and fines. Grass too long, trash can visible, mailbox paint slightly chipped. She had a way of finding problems where nobody else even thought to look. But this was something else entirely. Because that night wasn't just any night. It was the worst blizzard we'd had in over a decade. Wind howling like it had teeth, snow piling up faster than anyone could shovel, roads disappearing under inches every hour, and the county had already issued warnings telling people to stay inside unless it was an emergency. And for me, it was. Because 3 days earlier, I'd signed a temporary contract with the county to help clear residential roads using my truck. I'd fitted it with a heavy-duty plow blade, spent my own money getting it ready, not because I had to, but because I knew what happened when roads went unplowed out here. People got stranded, emergency vehicles got delayed, and in a storm like this, that could turn dangerous real fast. So yeah, my truck wasn't just sitting there for convenience. It was part of the only thing keeping our neighborhood from getting completely buried. I opened the door and the cold hit me like a slap, sharp and immediate, and Marlene didn't even bother with a greeting. She just held up a clipboard like it was a badge and said, "Mr. Carter, your vehicle is in violation of Section 8.3, overnight street obstruction. It needs to be removed immediately." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, "You're kidding, right? It's a blizzard." She didn't blink. "Rules don't get suspended because of weather," she said, flat as ever. Behind her, the tow truck driver shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, snow collecting on his shoulders as he glanced between us like he'd walked into an argument halfway through. I stepped outside a little more, pointing toward my truck, half buried already, the plow blade sticking out like the only thing still fighting back against the storm. "That truck is clearing roads tonight," I told her. "I've got a contract with the county. I'm scheduled to start another run in less than an hour." Marlene tilted her head slightly, like I'd just told her I was planning to launch a rocket from my driveway. "That's not relevant," she said, tapping her clipboard. "What's relevant is that your vehicle is parked in a restricted position." I remember just staring at her for a second, snow blowing between us, trying to figure out if she actually believed what she was saying or if this was just some kind of power move gone too far. And maybe it was both. Because Marlene had a history with me. Nothing dramatic, just a handful of small disagreements over the years. Times I pushed back when she tried to find people for things that didn't make sense. Times I spoke up at HOA meetings when she overstepped. Nothing major, but enough that I could see it in her eyes now. This wasn't just about a truck. This was personal. The tow driver finally spoke up, his voice cutting through the wind. "Ma'am, you sure about this? Conditions are pretty rough out here." Marlene didn't even look at him. "I'm very sure," she said. "Please proceed." He sighed, rubbed the back of his neck, and started walking toward my truck, boots crunching through the snow, and I felt this knot tighten in my chest because suddenly this wasn't just a ridiculous conversation anymore. This was actually happening. I followed him, raising my voice over the wind. "Hey man, listen, that truck's not just parked, it's working tonight. People are depending on it." He stopped when he got close enough to see the front clearly. Really see it. And that's when everything shifted, because the moment his eyes landed on the plow blade, you could practically see the gears turning in his head. He crouched slightly, brushing snow off the metal, then stood up slower, looking back at me with a different expression now, less annoyed, more concerned. "You using this for snow removal?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, neighborhood roads, county contract." He looked past me at the street, already buried, then back at the house, then over at Marlene still standing there like she was waiting for a routine job to be completed, and that's when I had a feeling this wasn't going to go the way she expected. The driver straightened up slowly, snow clinging to his jacket, and for a second he just stood there looking at my truck like it had suddenly become a whole different situation than the one he thought he'd been called into. Then he let out a low breath and muttered, "Yeah, that's what I thought." He turned and walked back toward Marlene, boots dragging a little through the snow, like each step came with a growing sense that this job was about to turn into something he didn't want any part of. I stayed where I was, close enough to hear, but not close enough to interrupt, the wind carrying pieces of their conversation back to me in broken fragments, at first calm, then sharper, then unmistakably heated. "You didn't say anything about this being a plow truck," he said, voice tight but controlled. Marlene didn't miss a beat. "That's irrelevant. It's parked illegally." He shook his head, glancing back at the street again. "Ma'am, with all due respect, it's not irrelevant. If this guy's clearing roads, towing that truck could shut down access for the whole block." She stepped closer to him, lowering her voice like she was trying to keep things contained, but the edge was still there. "My responsibility is to enforce community regulations. Your responsibility is to tow vehicles when requested." He gave a short laugh, the kind that comes from disbelief more than humor. "My responsibility is also not to make things worse in the middle of a storm like this." That's when the tone shifted completely. Marlene's posture stiffened, shoulders pulling back, chin lifting just slightly, and I could tell she wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she probably saw as just a contractor doing a job. "Are you refusing to complete the service?" she asked, each word measured, like she was already building a case in her head. The driver didn't answer right away. He just looked around again, the wind, the snow piling up on the road, the way the streetlights were barely visible through the white haze. And then he pointed, not aggressively, but firmly, toward the front of my truck. "That thing right there, that's not decoration. That's the only reason your roads aren't already impassable." I could feel the tension from where I stood, like the air itself had tightened, and for a moment nobody spoke, just the wind filling the space between them. Then Marlene exhaled sharply, clearly losing patience. "We have bylaws for a reason. If we start making exceptions every time someone claims they're doing something important, then the entire system falls apart." I couldn't help it. I stepped closer, my voice cutting in before I even fully decided to speak. "This isn't a claim, Marlene. You can call the county if you want. They'll confirm it. I've already cleared 2 streets tonight." She turned to me, eyes narrowing slightly, and there it was again. That look, like this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control slipping out of her hands. "And yet," she said, "your vehicle is still in violation." The driver rubbed his face with one hand, clearly trying to stay patient, but you could see it wearing thin. "Look, even if I wanted to tow this, which I don't, getting it out of here right now is risky. My truck's already slipping, the road's barely holding." As if to prove his point, the tow truck behind him let out a low mechanical whine as its wheels spun slightly in place, struggling against the icy incline. He gestured back at it. "You see that? That's me barely keeping control. Now you want me to hook up a plow truck and drag it out in this?" Marlene crossed her arms tighter. "That's not my concern." And that was the moment everything kind of clicked into place for me, because it wasn't just stubbornness anymore. It was willful disregard, the kind that comes from being so locked into authority that you stop seeing the bigger picture entirely. The driver nodded slowly, like he'd reached a decision internally before he even spoke it out loud. "It should be your concern," he said, quieter now, but heavier. "Because if something goes wrong out here, it's not just on me." She opened her mouth to respond, but he cut in, not raising his voice, just firm enough that it stopped her mid-sentence. "Liability doesn't disappear just because you point at a rulebook." There was a pause, longer this time, and I could see Marlene recalculating, trying to figure out how to push this back under her control, but the situation had already shifted too far. The driver took a step back, creating just enough distance to make it clear he wasn't playing along anymore. "I'm not towing that truck," he said plainly. No drama, no build-up, just a line drawn in the snow. Marlene's expression hardened instantly. "You were dispatched for a service," she snapped. "Refusing to complete it could have consequences." He shrugged slightly, like he'd already weighed those consequences and decided they were worth it. So could doing it. The wind picked up again, swirling snow between us, and for a second the whole scene felt almost surreal, like we were all standing in the middle of something bigger than just an argument, something that had already decided its outcome. The driver turned away from her then, walking back toward his truck without waiting for permission or approval, and I watched as he climbed in, the engine revving a little louder as he carefully started backing up, tires slipping just enough to remind everyone how bad the conditions really were. Marlene stood there, unmoving, watching him leave, her face tight with frustration, and even from a distance I could tell she wasn't used to losing like this, not in public, not in front of someone she'd been trying to make an example out of. I walked back toward my porch slowly, the adrenaline starting to settle, replaced by that strange mix of relief and disbelief that comes after something almost goes very wrong, because that's what it felt like, not just an inconvenience avoided, but a genuine problem narrowly missed. Before I stepped inside, I glanced around the neighborhood, a few curtains shifting, silhouettes in windows, people who'd clearly been watching the whole thing unfold, probably just as confused as I'd been when it started. And in that moment, it hit me. If that truck had actually been towed, even for a few hours, these roads would have been done for, completely buried by morning, no way in or out until the county could send backup, which in a storm like this could take days. I stepped back inside, shutting the door against the wind, but the tension from outside lingered, like it hadn't quite let go yet. I didn't have much time to think about it, though, because I still had work to do. I geared back up, grabbed my keys, and within minutes I was back out there, engine roaring to life, the plow cutting into the snow like it was meant to, pushing through streets that were already disappearing again, each pass buying the neighborhood a little more time, a little more access, a little more safety. And as I worked, going up and down those roads, I kept thinking about what had just happened, how close we came to losing this over something that, in the grand scheme of things, didn't matter at all. By the time the storm finally started to ease up, it was late afternoon the next day, and everything had that strange, quiet stillness that only comes after something loud and relentless finally burns itself out, like the world was catching its breath. The sky was still gray, the roads lined with heavy walls of snow, but they were open, passable, barely in some spots, but open enough for people to get out if they needed to. And I remember sitting in my truck at the end of Maple Bend, engine idling low, just looking down the street thinking, this could have gone very differently. Because if that tow truck had actually taken my rig the night before, none of this would be clear right now, none of it. I was exhausted, hands sore, shoulders tight, the kind of tired that settles deep in your bones. But there was also this quiet sense of purpose that hadn't been there before, like for once, what I was doing actually mattered in a way people could see. And apparently, they did see it. Because when I finally pulled back into my driveway and shut everything down, I hadn't even made it halfway to my front door before I heard someone call out, "Danny." I turned and saw Mr. Alvarez from across the street, bundled up in 3 layers, carefully making his way over through the packed snow. Behind him, a couple more neighbors were stepping out, waving, nodding, the kind of acknowledgement that doesn't need a big speech to mean something. "We heard what happened last night," he said, slightly out of breath, but smiling. "That HOA lady almost got your truck towed, right?" I gave a small nod, half shrugging it off. "Almost," I said. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Man, if that had gone through, we'd all be stuck here right now." And that was the thing. It wasn't just me thinking it anymore. People understood what had been at stake. Over the next hour or so, more neighbors came by, some just to say thanks, some to check in, some to vent a little about the whole situation. And you could feel this quiet shift in the way people talked about the HOA. Less respect, more frustration, like something had finally crossed a line that had been building for a while. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd had issues with Marlene, not even close. There were stories, small ones mostly, but enough of them that when you stack them together, they painted a pretty clear picture. Warnings over harmless things, fines that felt unnecessary, decisions made without any real input from the community. And this, trying to tow a snowplow in the middle of a blizzard, that was the tipping point. By that evening, word had spread beyond just our street. Group chats lighting up, emails going around, people asking questions, demanding explanations, and for the first time since Marlene had taken over, it felt like the balance of power had shifted, just a little, but enough to matter. 2 days later, the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting, and I'll be honest, I didn't plan on going at first. I figured I'd said my piece already, indirectly at least, but then Mr. Alvarez stopped by again that morning and said, "You should be there. Not for you, for everyone else." So I went. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a space that usually felt too small for events, but that night it felt even tighter, packed with residents, voices low but tense, like everyone was waiting for something to break one way or another. Marlene was there at the front, sitting with the rest of the board, posture straight, expression controlled, but you could see it if you looked close enough, that slight stiffness, like she knew this wasn't going to go the way she wanted. When the meeting started, it didn't take long before the questions came. Not angry at first, just direct. Why was a tow ordered during an active emergency? Was the county contacted? What was the risk assessment? And Marlene, she tried to hold her ground. The board has a responsibility to enforce community standards, she said. Almost word for word what she'd told me the night before, but it didn't land the same this time. Because now, she wasn't talking to one person standing in the snow. She was talking to a room full of people who had lived through the consequences of that decision. Someone in the back spoke up, voice louder than the rest. Standards don't mean much if they put people at risk. That shifted the room. You could feel it. Heads nodding, murmurs building. And for a moment, Marlene didn't respond. She just looked out at the crowd. And I wondered if this was the first time she'd realized that authority only works when people believe in it. Eventually, one of the other board members stepped in, trying to redirect things, soften the edges a bit, talking about reviewing procedures, improving communication, making sure situations like this were handled differently in the future. And just like that, the narrative started to change. Not a full apology, not really, but enough of a concession that people felt heard. As for Marlene, she didn't say much after that. Just sat there, quieter than before, hands folded, eyes occasionally drifting toward the back of the room where I was standing. Not angry, not exactly. More like something had cracked, just slightly. In the certainty she carried. After the meeting, people lingered outside, talking in small groups, the tension easing into something more reflective. And as I walked back to my truck, I couldn't help but think about how close all of this came to going the other way, how one decision, made at the wrong time for the wrong reasons, could have left an entire neighborhood in a much worse situation. But it didn't, not this time. And maybe that's the part that sticks with me the most, not the argument, not even the near miss, but the reminder that rules, no matter how well-intentioned, don't mean much if they ignore the reality right in front of them. And sometimes, it takes a moment like that, uncomfortable, public, impossible to ignore, to bring things back into balance. Now I'm curious what you think, because situations like this aren't always black and white. Was Marlene just doing her job, sticking to the rules no matter what, or did she go too far trying to enforce something that didn't make sense in the middle of an emergency? And what would you have done if you were that tow truck driver? Follow the order, or walk away like he did? Let me know in the comments. I read all of them. And trust me, this kind of thing happens more often than people think.